Right. Hello and welcome to this meeting, Living in Hackney. My name is Councillor Sharon Patrick and I'm the chair of this meeting. Thank you. So this meeting is being recorded and live streamed, and it's being live streamed now. Can you please all keep your microphones on mute throughout the meeting? This will prevent audio feedback. If you're getting feedback, please turn off nearby devices. If you'd like to speak, raise your hand to get my attention. We do have electronic hands now. If I don't see that, I should normally do, but if you don't, put your physical hand up and I will call you. The chat function must not be used to have conversation with other participants or to provide personal information. All chat is recorded as part of the meeting. Officers can assist if you've got problems. This is a formal meeting of Hackney Council. Please note the press may be in attendance and the press and public have the right to record or film this meeting. Apologies for absence. I've got apologies from Councillor Mahan for lateness. I don't think we have any other apologies. No. Item 2, urgent business, order of business. There's no urgent item and the order of business is set out. Item 3 is declarations of interest. I don't know if members have any declarations of interest. If not, we'll move on to item 4, which is the main item of discussion for tonight.
Chair,
yes.
Chair, I just need to say that I'm chair of Hackney Parks Forum.
Right, thank you. Okay, sorry, that was a declaration. I don't know if it's counted declaration, but Tracy will record it in the minutes.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we've got the green infrastructure and Hackney Parks and Green Spaces strategy. This is a presentation about the green infrastructure strategy and the parks and open spaces strategy that is out for consultation. We've got an hour and a half for this discussion. Tonight we're going to look at these two, look at the strategy, the infrastructure strategy and the green spaces strategy. The green infrastructure strategy are much more than a strategy for the provision of traditional green space of parks and gardens. Green infrastructure is integral and essential to the borough resilience, meeting its future challenges and the delivery of wider strategies, both at the community and individual level. To maximise the benefit of the green infrastructure, the council is proposing to interlink 3 strategies. The presentation tonight will cover the draft green infrastructure strategy, providing a short overview of the vision, baseline and needs, objectives, opportunities, projects and initiatives. Although there is no statutory requirement to produce a park strategy, the council is committed to a park strategy and on improving our parks and open spaces. The last strategy covered the management of Hackney's parks. It was the Hackney Park strategy from 2008 to 2013. The new strategy has been developed and the Parks and Green Spaces strategy was out to consultation. This closed today, the 18th of January. But still we're on the 18th, so we hope you'll take our comments into on board. As part of the consultation process, the views of Living in Hackney Commission are being sought as it develops the Parks and Green Spaces strategy. Okay, thank you very much. We're starting off with, I believe, the director, Mr. Aled Griffiths. Is that right?
Aled Richards.
Aled Richards.
Richard, sorry. Sorry.
No problem.
Sorry, Aled.
No problem. I'm going to be very short. I'm going to then hand you over to Matthew Carrington and Sam Parry and Ian Holland, who will run through the 2 strategies. But as you mentioned, the council has long recognised the significant impact the green infrastructure can have on the achievements of its vision, and has placed a very, very high priority. It's actually within the DNA of virtually all the environmental services the council has in improving the green infrastructure. across the borough, and improving the linkages as well between the various green infrastructure. What we've got at the moment, we've got a huge challenge in terms of climate change, and green infrastructure has got an extremely important role in cooling the urban environment, for example, reducing temperatures by planting large canopy trees, which in turn would improve the air quality. And what we've seen over the last year, especially due to the pandemic and the trauma caused by the pandemic, the sheer importance now of the green parks and the green infrastructure we got in the borough for the local residents, both in terms of physical and mental well-being. So what we are looking at now in terms of linking all these strategies together to put a very robust strategy to get community food growing, and also access to nature, which has been demonstrated to have such a beneficial impact on mental well-being. During the pandemic, we have seen the uses of the green infrastructure we've got in terms of the parks and open spaces. We've got more use than we've ever seen before. It has raised certain issues over the last summer because of the sheer amount of people, but it is showing what a vital resource it is for the residents of the borough, many of which do not have access to private gardens and are utterly reliant on the gardens and the parks and open spaces we have in the borough for the physical and their mental well-being. But also, it's by linking these parks together, we are looking at improving the infrastructure we've got for cycling and walking in order to improve the health of the population. And as you mentioned, in order to maximise the benefits of the green infrastructure, which can deliver to the borough, we are at the moment preparing 3 interlinked documents: the green infrastructure strategy, which I'll hand you over to Matthew now with the presentation, the parks and green spaces strategy, which Sam and Ian will present, and the third strategy we've got is a nature recovery plan, which will be the key mechanism to help prioritise, deliver and monitor nature recovery in the borough. Now I'm going to hand you over now to Matthew and Sam, which will run through the green infrastructure strategy. Sam.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Ali, for that introduction. I'll just keep my bit short because I'll let the presentation is the main item here. But it's probably worth saying that the work was commissioned to deliver an existing manifesto commitment, which was the Green Infrastructure Plan. And also it was noted in the Open Spaces Assessment that informed the local plan, which asked for a green infrastructure strategy to be undertaken. And therefore AECOM, which Sam Griffiths represents, were commissioned in about February last year to start working on this. And picking up Alid's earlier point about nature recovery, we also commissioned London Wildlife Trust to develop a local nature recovery plan and also undertake a review of our sites of importance for nature conservation. The Green Infrastructure Strategy is following new guidance which has been developed by the GLA. It's not been issued yet, but we are one of the first boroughs to be undertaking it to this template. And it also identifies the structures for other operational plans like the local nature recovery plan. Just a final bit, we're also one of the first authorities to be undertaking a local nature recovery plan as well. So we're sort of leading around that type of work. The work in terms of developing the GIS has involved key people from the GLA and also key staff members from planning and parks and green spaces as a working group. But it's also had a wider internal project advisory group that's involved housing, area regeneration, housing development, amongst others. We have undertaken some initial public engagement with particular parties like the Hackney Biodiversity Partnership and also key stakeholders around the nature recovery work. But we are planning to do some more engagement over the next month or so, and I'm speaking to people in some outside organisations about that and how they'll be involved. So it's probably best if I hand over to Sam now to run through the presentation, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew. Matthew, or perhaps Chair, if you might just let me know if you can see my screen just a moment. Right, that should be zooming to your screens as we speak.
Yep.
Okay, very good. Okay, so I trust you can see the introduction slide there, Hackney Green Infrastructure Strategy, and we'll take the next 10 or 15 minutes to run through this presentation that will give you an overview of where we are up to so far. As Matthew kindly said, my name is Sam Griffiths. I'm a landscape architect working at AECOM. I've been working with Matthew and others at the council now for the best part of a year on this strategy. So just taking a step back, it may be familiar to many, but it's always worth a reminder, what are we talking about when we come to green infrastructure? And Alid has already given us a good introduction, but it's essentially all of the green assets within the borough. So the metropolitan open land, amenity grassland around our housing estates, the woodlands, street trees, gardens, public realm, built green features, wetlands and waterways. But crucially, individually, they are all individual assets, but they really become green infrastructure when they are joined into a network, when this network can be planned, designed and managed. And depending on how we do that, then we can provide different benefits to the environment, to social and economic factors. And as I say, crucially, it's when they are designed into a network that they become green infrastructure. Now, this is the broad structure of the green infrastructure strategy, and we'll give a bit of a...
Sam, it's too small, we can't read it.
It's too small, okay.
Yeah.
I will do my best. I'll tell you what's on the screen. This will be the smallest text, and I apologize for that. Sorry about that. I'll read out this one so it can be clear. So the first thing here is our context, which establishes the case for green infrastructure in Hackney, and I'm going to talk through that in a little bit more detail in just a moment. We've then got the baseline and the needs analysis. So we want to understand exactly what Hackney already has in terms of its existing green infrastructure and where it's deficient and where we need to focus our intention and resources moving forwards. That has then informed our vision, which is going to state how how the borough can change over the next 20 years, or just a little less than that now, and we're 2021 up until 2040. That vision is then detailed in a number of specific objectives which flesh out that vision. We then look at opportunities which tell us how we can realize those individual objectives. So that's where we start to get really quite practical. And then the proposal section lists a number of specific interventions where we get down to individual streets and linkages and parks. And this is where it really gets the location specific. And then the forward plan, the final section, identifies the priority tasks that need to be undertaken in order to realize that vision. Apologies for the text again on that slide. So we started off with our context. Again, Alid has alluded to a number of these already, but these are things that green infrastructure can at least help. It's not going to solve all of these problems, but it's going to help. So outdoor air pollution, urban heat, of course, the COVID pandemic, cardiovascular disease are all variables that can be addressed in some way by green infrastructure. Climate change is a key factor underpinning this whole strategy. Of course, looking back to the climate change emergency declaration back in 2019, nature recovery is a key element to this, particularly following or keeping up with the Environment Bill. And this piece of work, this strategy very much has to dovetail with the local nature recovery plan that Matthew mentioned a few minutes ago. Also, again, probably nothing new to those on the call, sustainable growth. Hackney is forecast to experience a high percentage change in terms of population, people living in the borough. I believe it's approximately 20% over the period of this strategy. So we've got to accommodate sustainable growth. And then simply the benefits of green infrastructure, there are many. It's good simply because it is a good thing. It gives us more livable neighbourhoods. It improves the character of our environment. It's good for our mental health. There are many other benefits of green infrastructure. Our starting point was looking actually beyond the borough boundary. Of course, green infrastructure doesn't take any notice of administrative boundaries. Key assets on the edge, we've got, of course, Lee Valley Regional Park, one of London's primary green infrastructure assets, right on the edge of Hackney. A number of sizable parks as well, of course, Victoria Park in Tower Hamlets and Finsbury Park up in the northwest. And then, of course, we've got our waterways, so the River Lee, the Regent's Canal and the New River are our primary corridors through the urban townscape. You've got to take this slide with a slight pinch of salt, but we've looked at green cover in compared to neighbouring boroughs, and this is using GLA data, which was gained by remote sensing. So when we talk about green cover, it's not about the quality of it, it's not about how connected the network is, it's simply how much of Hackney is green. And you can see there in the yellow bar, Hackney is high 30s, so about 38% green, whereas the average, if you look at the neighbouring boroughs, is a little way down, about 32%. Of course, that's got to be qualified by the fact the City of London is included, and that's got about 6.2%, I think, and of course is a very different kind of townscape to the rest of the boroughs. So a slight word of caution there, but we are a little greener than the neighbours, you can see. So then we're saying, well, a little greener than the neighbours, but what have we got? What is within Hackney? The answer is 939 hectares of green cover, and that comprises the parks and green spaces, the sites of importance for nature conservation, trees and woodlands, rivers and wetlands, green roofs and domestic gardens. There are key categories, there are key typologies of green assets. So taking each of those briefly in turn this evening, starting with parks and green spaces, and this is building on the open space study from a few years ago. Some key points, some key takeaways. 3/4 of the population within Hackney rely on parks for their primary outdoor space. And yet there are 7 wards, and we'll touch on this again later, but 7 wards, particularly in the west and in the south, that are deficient in access to open space. So the key takeaway there is we've got a good number of parks, we've got some high quality parks, but they are not evenly distributed, and that leaves some areas deficient. Sites of importance for nature conservation. Primarily here we're talking about our key ecological and biodiversity assets. And if I flick between those two slides, you'll notice, and I'm sure you already know, that many of the parks are also designated as these sites for importance for nature conservation. And therefore, there is inevitably a compromise at times between ecological function and recreational value. And sometimes the ecological function can be lost or compromised by other demands. Also, this network is relatively fragmented, and as with all elements of green infrastructure, it performs best, and we get the best returns when this is joined into a coherent network. Trees and woodlands. I quite like the fact that Hackney is, I suppose, anecdotally known as an urban arboretum. I think that's fantastic, alluding to the point there's over 350 species within the borough, a great number. But the parks and domestic gardens, they're key assets within that makeup. And street trees are a particularly valuable tool for forming these linkages that we would like to see more of between these key ecological and recreational assets. Rivers and wetlands, also we're looking at flooding here. So I've alluded already to the 3 primary waterways that go through the borough. But there's also these 9 critical drainage areas where there is a tendency for more flooding during severe weather. And this is relevant because it shows us the kind of green infrastructure that could be used in these areas to help to minimise the risk of flooding. So, of course, we're primarily talking about SUDs here, but we'd like to see, of course, multifunctional SUDs that also promote an element of greening within them as part of this strategy. Apologies, we've not got the size for the green roofs and the domestic gardens because that data is that much harder to map. But it's important to recognise that these assets, although often private, are a key element of our green infrastructure network. So the key takeaways there from the baseline, there's a good level of green cover overall. The waterways comprise the key green corridors. However, the network is largely fragmented, and there are areas of low quality greening that could be enhanced to provide wider benefits. As mentioned, the southwestern part of the borough is typically in the need of the most enhancement, particularly in terms of open space and particularly accessible open space. And there are some gaps in the network, particularly the strategic road network, which of course unsurprisingly tallies with a elevated level of air pollution. And there is also some compromise in the quality of our assets where they serve both an ecological and a recreational function. So that's the summary of our baseline. And that's led to this vision, and I emphasize the draft at the beginning of this, but the draft vision is that by 2040, Hackney will be a series of livable neighbourhoods that are resilient to the effects of climate change, provide a network for wildlife to thrive, and promote the physical and mental health of its residents. That is where we would like Hackney to be by 2040. So breaking that down a little bit more into different chunks takes us on to our objectives. So objective number 1 is to improve the residents' health and well-being. So particularly this is around active travel, providing perhaps more parks, but if we can't do more parks or more small green spaces, can we promote some green links to the existing network? If there's constraints of space, can we provide some new cul-de-sac pocket parks in some areas where there is the least provision of accessible green space? And also it's about minimizing air and noise pollution by integrating new strategic planting into our network. Objective 2, to become more resilient to the effects of climate change. Of course, there's a wider goal about slowing that, but we know that the climate is changing. That's bringing new challenges in terms of weather and adaptation. So that's, we're really looking at those 4 bullet points there on the right-hand side, expanding the SUDS network to cope with those flooding events, again, particularly multifunctional green SUDS. Protecting existing trees and increasing that tree canopy is going to help with shading, to help with the urban heat island effect and also attenuate surface water. But then we need to be diversifying even more that plant stock. As I say, 350 species is good, but we want to be continually diversifying that so we have an elevated level of biosecurity and safeguarding that for the future. And then a promotion of urban greening. So this is particularly around green roofs and green walls in new developments coming forwards, which helps to regulate temperature. Objective 3 is about increasing green infrastructure provision in the areas of deficiency. So again, this map here is taken from the open space study from a few years ago, and essentially the darker the blue, the greater the need. So again, it highlights those wards typically in the west and also the south of the borough are particularly deficient in access to green open space. And these are the key areas that we would like to see addressed through the strategy. Objective 4, increase ecological connectivity between the existing network of nature conservation sites. That's for both people and for wildlife. So that's primarily that SYNC network, the sites of importance for nature conservation. It's about protecting the best assets. We're talking about net gains for biodiversity, but it's particularly to emphasize it's that network. How can we join up those existing assets so both people, but particularly wildlife, can move between them? And that's really that is in a nutshell, the focus of that local nature recovery network that Matthew was talking about a little earlier. Objective number 5, to maximise delivery of green infrastructure through increased collaboration between internal departments and between the council and key external partners. So it's a recognition that green infrastructure spans a number of administrations, it spans boundaries, and it's in the interest of everybody and different departments within the council. And if we're going to deliver this coherent network, then we need to be communicating between all of these different groups and stakeholders that might be bringing schemes forwards. So this is about enabling that communication to make sure that this network is indeed joined up. So we're talking about those departments within the council, working with neighbouring boroughs as well and landowners, and then with community groups. And there's just a selection there. It's not extensive on this presentation, but friends of groups, community initiatives, and then the army of one-off volunteers who would also be involved. We'll be coming into land shortly, but opportunities. This is around, we've got all of these ideas, we've got this vision that we would like to see by 2040, but how are we going to do that? What are our tools? What have we got to work with? Well, we've got our existing network, particularly parks and green spaces, which in particular a key asset is the estates and the green space around our housing estates. So how can we enhance those to perform a wider suite of functions and contribute to that wider network? Transforming streets and the public realm. If we're going to be joining up these existing assets, we need increasing proportion of green infrastructure on our streets. And key opportunities there are the current and emerging no traffic neighbourhoods, Cul-de-sac pocket parks is exciting, particularly in those areas of deficiency with regard to access to green space. Expanding the SUDS network, particularly in those critical drainage areas, is another key mean. And then the tree network really enables us to form stepping stones between those existing assets. Urban greening, this is well embedded in LP33, particularly around initiative or policies like the urban greening factor and the open space requirements. But urban greening of existing and new buildings, new developments is a key way to realise some of these objectives. The enhancement and creation of green links. Again, this is primarily our rivers, the waterways, but also we're looking to introduce a number of new green links through exploiting some of these opportunities where they can join up. And that's really where we are at the moment. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that on the next couple of slides. And then lastly, the mobilisation of citizens and community groups. It's bringing those groups together again to feed into a coherent set of goals and objectives. So that's all the work that's been done. Where we are currently is talking to different departments within the council about the emerging proposals. So we're developing this spatial framework, and this is essentially a map which identifies where these opportunities overlap, and therefore where there's opportunities to create these new green linkages and these new green spaces to become an integrated network and therefore truly deliver green infrastructure. To do that, it's recognised that there will be need to be shifts in organisational structures and also how we use policy. So therefore, there are a number of initiatives which speak to that. And then lastly, there's a series of projects which are practical things that need to happen on the ground and to enable this network to be realised over the coming years. And that takes us on to our final, that's our thank you, but our final slide, which I was going to mention after the projects, there's a forward plan, which essentially highlights the key projects which are a priority for the next 5 to 10 years. And then having jumped the gun before, that's when I say thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. If I take all of the presentations, I think they're all quite linked. And then I'll take questions and comments on all of them, if that's all right with members.
Good idea, Chair.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's great, Chair.
Okay. So who's next?
I present now, Chair.
Right. Who said that?
It's me. I'm just sharing my screen now.
Right.
Sam Parry.
Oh, Sam Parry, thank you.
They all have beards in the green spaces department these days.
No comments, Councillor Rathbone.
Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Great. Thank you very much. And thanks, Sam and Matthew. Thanks for inviting us along today. It's really exciting to be introducing the new strategy here today. And we're really excited about delivering it from next year. As a bit of background, the Parks and Green Spaces Service is responsible for 58 parks and green spaces in Hackney. And from next year, we will also be responsible for around 200 housing green spaces as well. The new Parks and Green Spaces strategy will guide our work over the next 10 years and will cover both parks and housing green space. Given the uncertainty in the world at the moment, it's a high-level document with guiding principles rather than a series of specific improvement projects in specific parks. The draft strategy was written after extensive engagement with stakeholders at the beginning of this year, and we're currently in the public consultation period, which, as you mentioned, closes today. This is the first of many meetings, just sharing what the strategy has to offer. There's a number of reasons why we are introducing a new park strategy at this time. We've not had a park strategy since 2013. And since then, the world has changed quite significantly. We've seen introductions of new technology, such as drones and electric scooters. There's been cuts to public services and an increased interest in the environment. So lots of people are more concerned now about glyphosate and the use of other chemicals, the use of plastic, air pollution, and climate change. We've got more people cycling through our parks. We've got more people expecting new services and facilities in our parks, such as outdoor gyms. We've got more professional dog walkers using our parks, and people are using technology to connect to us and expect delivery far quicker from us. There's an increase in interest in biodiversity. And as I mentioned, we will be taking on housing green space service from this year, which will drastically increase the amount of green space that we are looking after. So just to reiterate, the Parks and Green Spaces strategy sits underneath the Green Infrastructure strategy that Sam has just introduced, and alongside the Local Nature Recovery Plan that's also being produced at the moment. We started in early 2020, meeting with lots of stakeholders to discuss what they wanted to see in the strategy. And as a result of these meetings, we produced a series of categories, which we then turned into chapters in our strategy. This is the draft strategy, which many of you have seen. I'm just going to briefly take you through the structure and introduce the main themes that we've got in the strategy. So in the strategy, we talk about the process that we've gone through to get to the finished document that you've seen tonight. And it's a deliberately very easy to read document. It's very visual because we want the general public to pick it up and understand it. We want everyone in the park service to look at it on a regular basis. After speaking to the stakeholders, we have created three main themes, which you've seen in the strategy tonight. The first theme is all about working with communities. Secondly, we want to activate our parks and green spaces. And thirdly, we want our green spaces to be more environmentally sustainable. And we want our service as a whole to be more environmentally sustainable. So the first theme that I mentioned, working with communities, came out of lots of people saying that they wanted to engage with us a lot more. And local people in Hackney do get involved in their green spaces at the moment, but they wanted to do so on a greater level. We've got a few volunteers in our parks at the moment, but we really want to expand that. So one of our commitments, as you can see, is to appoint a dedicated volunteering officer to oversee a comprehensive and intergenerational volunteering programme in Hackney's parks. We want to develop a skills and employment pathway, creating opportunities for structured career progression. And linked to that, we want to introduce a new apprenticeship programme. So we want young people to volunteer in our parks and potentially then find employment in our parks as well. We do lots of engagement with local communities at the moment on parks and green spaces, but we really want to expand this. And we want to see our park user groups actively involved in looking after our green spaces. And finally, we want to involve young people in designing our response to the climate emergency, as well as other improvements and facilities in our parks. So this is just a selection of some of the commitments that we've got in this theme. Altogether, there are 10 commitments in each of these themes. Second theme, as I mentioned, is all about activation. We want to make it easier for residents to plan and host appropriate community and cultural events in parks. When we went out and spoke to people, particularly Hackney Parks Forum, lots of the groups said that it was difficult for them to put on events at the moment. They didn't know the process. The process was bureaucratic and difficult for them to navigate. So we want to help our residents groups to put these events on. We want to create a design guide to inform the development of parks and green spaces, including play areas. We want to create criteria for investing in parks, sports facilities and play improvements. This is about being a bit more transparent about how we're investing in our parks and green spaces so that people understand where our money is going. We want to expand the provision of cafes and food outlets in parks and green spaces. We've got a number at the moment, but people really want to see more. And we want to develop a Parks and Green Spaces public arts and culture strategy and policy. And this is something we started speaking to the cultural team about at the moment. We're getting lots of interest from artists in Hackney wanting to put on exhibitions and more permanent sculptures in our parks. And it helps give another reason for people to visit our parks and green spaces. But we want to make sure we've got a process for overseeing that delivery. And finally, we've got a theme all about environmental sustainability. And this is something that came through really strongly when we've been speaking to our partners and stakeholders. So this is around two main areas. Firstly, responding to the biodiversity crisis, and secondly, responding to the climate emergency. So we want to work towards being a zero carbon service by 2031. We want to reuse more green waste within parks and green spaces. So lots of our green waste at the moment is taken out of the borough and composted. We've got initiatives at Haggerston Park where we're keeping all of our green waste on site, and that compost is then reused on the site itself. We want to expand that sort of initiative elsewhere. We want to increase biodiversity in line with the local nature recovery plan, which is being developed. And we want to create more wild areas across all parks and green spaces. And again, we've already had lots of interest in this particular commitment from groups across the borough wanting to help deliver that for us. We want to eliminate all annual planting and replace it with more sustainable and drought-tolerant planting schemes so that we don't have to take all of our plants out each year and replant them. And we want to significantly reduce the amount of glyphosate that we use. And in the consultation, lots of people are saying we perhaps should go further than that and look at all of the chemicals that we use in our parks and green spaces. We've started this already. We currently use 50% less than we did a few years ago. And there is a no spray zone being trialled in the E5 postcode at the moment. Finally, following on from Sam's presentation, we want to follow the recommendations of the Emerging Green Infrastructure Strategy, where they relate to parks and green spaces, looking at opportunities to connect parks and green spaces together. So as I mentioned, the document is an overarching strategy. It doesn't give the detail on specific improvement projects within parks, but each year we will produce an action plan which will give a bit more detail about what we will be delivering each year. And we will report back on progress through our annual reports. So just to give you a bit of a timeline of the next steps, we are finishing consultation today, so we will start processing all the results of the consultation from this week. The strategy is due to go to Cabinet in April, and we will start delivering from April. We will publish the first annual report around June 2022. Any questions or comments?
Thank you. Can I ask on the consultation? I know it's online because I filled it in, but how have people been made aware that this strategy is online, especially considering COVID, that schools are shut? I know youth clubs are open, but I don't know whether youth clubs know about it. You know, have TRAs been consulted, TMOs? Who's been told that this consultation is out there? Because I think sometimes, you know, we keep hearing about the digital divide across the council. We're hoping to look at that in the near future in this commission. But I do worry that when consultations, especially as large as this, are only online, and especially during COVID, when people may not know being about consultations or be in groups to be told about it.
Yeah, so because of COVID, unfortunately, we've not been able to do as many face-to-face meetings during the consultation period as we would like. We did have a number of physical meetings before the latest restrictions hit. So we were able to meet with lots of groups and individuals face-to-face. And we made a big effort to publicise this consultation in the latest round. So it went in Hackney today, and we've put hundreds of posters and banners up in the parks and in housing estates as well. We met with RLG the other week to speak to housing tenants representatives, and we've had over 500, I think nearly 600 responses so far, which is a really, really high number for the consultation of this type. So we're really pleased with the feedback. But if people are not online, they have been able to contact us, and we've been sending physical copies if people don't have the ability to respond online.
Thank you. But I don't know if I start off. Perhaps we've heard about the green infrastructure plan, and obviously the survey and what we're going to do in our parks and open spaces. I don't know if somebody wants to tell us a bit more about the links between. There's a lot of overlap between the two, and where sort of how we're going to create a unified parks and green strategy to make sure that the two work together for the borough. We heard there's lots of interesting things like parkplex and creating new parks and green spaces and biodiversity. There's a lot in there, and I just wondered how we're going to manage manage it, and also how it's going to, also it's going to mean that different sections of the council work together. So we're going to have street scene, parks, planning, etc., working together. And just wondered where we are with that happening, and whether everybody's on board.
Yeah, I would say that we've been really, it's really beneficial, the fact that we are delivering these two strategies at the same time alongside the replacement for the biodiversity strategy, because it means we've been able to speak to each other throughout the entire process. So I've met with Sam throughout the process while he's been creating his strategy. His strategy mentions the park strategy and vice versa. Just to be clear, the parks and green spaces strategy only covers parks and housing estate green spaces. It doesn't include streets or any of those other elements that Sam talked about. So that's what our strategy does, and Sam's strategy kind of picks up all the bits in between. So I don't know, Sam, if you want to add to that at all.
I've noticed there are a couple of hands, so I'm happy to speak to it, but whether Matthew or Alid's hand was in response to that, I'm happy for them to go first.
Matthew?
No, it wasn't actually. I think it's picking up Sam's point that when we've put together a project advisory group, we've tried to make sure that we've got that breadth of people across the council to be able to input into it. And I think it's the same thing that Sam Parry said, that there's an advantage in doing all this at the same time, well, in a sort of sequential way, but also at the same time. So it's quite good we're doing a nature recovery plan, so we'll understand that better now, because quite often these things don't sync in timeframes. We could have done the parks and green space strategy and then said, oh, we need to do the biodiversity action plan in 2 years' time. So I think there is a value in doing them all together. But I think, taking your point, there is clarity, I think. I think when people see the full documents, they'll see the relationship between the parks and green spaces strategy and the overall green infrastructure strategy work and the local nature recovery plan, and how they all link, and the bits of detail around it. So I'm confident that shouldn't be an issue. But obviously, because they have slightly similar names, there is a danger of slight confusion to people. And if you talk about green infrastructure, some people will see that as the parks and the housing spaces, but actually, obviously, it's much wider. It's private space, it's domestic gardens, it's all sorts of things. But I think that the fact that we've been doing them all together is a positive, really. And I think we've sort of both learned from that. And I think the other critical element of it is the engagement with members of the public and finding out what they are interested in. We know we've got a strong community of interest around parks and green spaces, and obviously we want to be able to harness that to the maximum benefit for our communities. And so therefore I think all these documents being done within a similar-ish time frame maximises that benefit as well. I don't know if Sam Griffith's got anything else to say, or Alid, or whether you feel that answers the questions.
Only in as much as it is also recognised that it's an ongoing thing, and it's a key objective, as I mentioned in the presentation, of the strategy is to set up a mechanism by which different departments and indeed stakeholders can work together. So whilst a lot of work has been done in that collaboration in the document's development, it's recognised that will need to continue once it is indeed finalised.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Ruffman and Councillor Eto. I noticed that this strategy of working together has started in my ward in the new playground on Millfield Park, which is on the edge of Millfield Estate and in Millfield Park, which is, when I walked by yesterday, it looks like they've started work on that already. So that shows that the work is beginning, which is really good, and welcome the new playground, because the playground's been redundant for many years.
Councillor Patrick, if I could just come in on that one, because it is a really good example of what the question you've just asked, really, which is there was a demand from park users for a new play area in the south of Millfields. There was also a demand from estates, tenants on the Millfields estate, to replace the play area that had to be taken out due to health and safety concerns. And it made absolutely no sense, no practical sense, to put two play areas literally within 10 or 15 metres of each other. What it did make sense is all the teams to work together to deliver a play area that was accessible by both residents and park users, and that's what we've just started delivering on the Millfields estate, and it should be finished in the next couple of months, hopefully.
Thank you, Ian.
Can I add as well that all of these work streams, street scene, pocket parks, the work we're doing in Dalston, Culverston Crescent, they're all integrated into the public realm, the climate change agenda. So we're all working in coordinating all of this one. So you don't have a disconnect. We're working with housing colleagues, as Ian said, is a partnership with residents and tenants in order to develop these schemes rather than a top-down approach. So hopefully that gives you reassurance that all these pocket parks and looking at greening the cul-de-sacs, they're all linked to the green infrastructure. So all the various public realm environmental services are all linked into this work stream.
Thank you. Councillor Ete. Do you want to unmute yourself, Councillor Ete?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Sorry about that. Thank you, everyone, for the presentation. I mean, like you rightly said, in terms of the use of space at the moment, the parks, and the importance of it during this pandemic and lockdown. And moving on, and we're looking at 2040. And I'm just thinking, if we're looking at that volume, will this strategy be able to address that long-term value in future? And secondly, if we're looking at, I mean, like an example that you've just cited, but I'm thinking of a bigger picture, you know, thinking, yes, 2040, a lot of people will be using, from now onwards, a lot of people will be using the park. Is it possible for us to have a complete park? How do I mean a complete park where you have, like in Clissold, you have an area for the children, you have, you know, in terms of the animals and everything. But could we have and then you also have the cafe. But could we have a place, an additional, probably within, where we can say, oh, this is designated for young people. You know, I know we've had a lot of young people in terms of involvement when it comes to the consultation and all that, because it is not every young person that wants to play only football, rugby, or whatever. So probably to start looking and thinking outside the box, what other activities can we add, or what can be included, and in terms of activities, not only for young people, that activities that will cut across board everyone. One of our aims, objectives is mental and well-being, looking forward. So somebody like me, I should be able to be free to go to the park to say, yes, I want to do something. What are those things that will be of interest to me within the park, where I can be in the park, look after my children, or look after my grandchildren, or look after my older children, where something accessible, you know, I'm just thinking of that. And secondly, with regards to the volunteer, will that be working with Hackney Works, or how will that work? Or is it going to be independently on its own, or is it going to be in conjunction with Hackney Works? And thirdly, thinking outside the box, I'm thinking, yes, sustainability and environment, and I'm thinking, another key area which I'm thinking just now is, if we have bees, might not be in the park, but in terms of our green space and in terms of our wood, will it be possible to look into a future investment that where we can have bees? I know people do have that, but where the council can say, this is something we can actually, in terms of I mean, that will be not just beneficial, but at the same time, probably to say, we have bees, we have honey that is coming from Hackney, which is Hackney honey or something like that. You know, those are just, I can see Aled smiling there. But, you know, I mean, looking at just thinking outside the box, and one has to think of impossibilities, and there's nothing that is impossibilities. It's an idea that if it doesn't work, maybe there are ways that things can be, you know, matched together for future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll take Councillor Rathbone, and then officers can come in. We'll take a couple all together. Councillor Rathbone.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. In fact, my questions are very much around what Councillor Etty was asking, but I'm just referring to point 3.13 on page 8 in our agenda, which is activate our parks and green spaces. And that's kind of where the rubber hits the road for me, and I think for many user groups as well, where it says making it easier for people to run their own community events. And I really would like to know what kind of commitment there is. I think there needs to be like a time thing to that, because people need to know, well, if I run a community event next year, how difficult is it going to be? Because it's rather difficult now. And in terms of use of space, in that particular item, it's talking about expanding the provision of food and drink. And I mean, this is another old chestnut, but nevertheless, it would be great if we had more tea, coffee places in our parks. And I know it has been difficult to let that, but I'm just wondering how much local people can be involved in that. I know a local resident contacted me recently to say he'd love to run a tea bar in Millfield's Park, but I know that that's difficult. So I just wondered, it's all about how are we going to keep on trying to get residents involved in our parks in different ways, as Councillor Etty was saying about young people, and also another old chestnut, food growing, that is mentioned here on estates. But I know some people would say, well, can't we use parts of parks or other green spaces to grow food? And I'm sort of thinking, with the way the pandemic is going and the way, you know, the effect Brexit is already having on vegetable and fruit coming into this country, would it be a good idea to try and encourage more vegetable growing and so on? So just a big question about really how we activate more people in our parks, particularly those. Sorry, just to add as well, it's just another old chestnut, third chestnut, is how do we involve...
How many chestnuts have you got, Councillor Rathbone?
I'm running out of paper, Councillor Rathbone, to note these down.
Look, this chestnut tree's got a lot of chestnuts left on the ground for me to pick up. Just to say that finally, how do we involve all our diverse communities in our parks as well through all these activities?
Thank you. Can I just reiterate Councillor Rathbone's park about diverse communities? I spent a lot of time in our parks. I normally spend a lot of time in our parks during the summer, but I think I've spent even more time now in the winter. And it does seem to me that our parks, certainly in the winter, maybe because it's cold, but aren't necessarily being used by all our communities. They're very much been, and yeah, we do need to make sure that everybody feels welcome in our parks, from whatever community they come from, be it a BAME community or our young people, which Councillor Etty's touched on, because we had a discussion earlier about the lack of things to do for for sort of teenagers.
Yes.
We've got great provision for under 5s and under 11s, you know, our play provision, but there's not a great deal in our parks, according to the report, for perhaps over 11s. I wouldn't necessarily call it play provision, because I don't think over 11s these days would say they play, but they do. They're all sophisticated young adults, but yeah, they do need provision and a wider offer for them. And even in the parks, when there's things like green gyms, or in Millfield, there's various bars and things around the park, which I assume for people to do exercise on. But
trim trails,
right? I wouldn't know what to do with them. I mean, perhaps some instructions. Yeah, I look at them, I think, okay, what do you do with that apart from that swing off of it? But yeah, I do think we need to pick up in our, perhaps also in our green infrastructure. We need to think about communities and where communities can meet. I know that some of the street pocket parks are used by the communities that live in those streets, often to meet together and socialise, because obviously they don't have tenants halls and things. And there is a thing for young people where they can meet not only safely but without causing problems to other residents. I mean, if they hang around these stairs on estates, they get told off and moved on. And if they're in the streets, they often get picked up by the police. So we do need to think about facilities for young people and where they can meet safely together. I know we've got excellent youth clubs, but they can't take all the young people in the borough, and not unless we invested a lot more money and built a lot more, more, and that's not going to happen presumably under austerity. Maybe when we get a Labour government, we can build enough youth clubs for every young person that wants to use one. Sorry.
Councillor Patrick, do you want me to come back on some of those questions? And forgive me if I miss any. Just starting with food growing, one of Councillor Rathbone's points, the reason the strategy is focused on food growing in estates is we think it will be significantly more successful, and there's already some fantastic work going on from the housing team in developing this already. What happens if we put food growing in parks and green spaces? We already have incredibly busy parks and green spaces. We already have a shortage of green spaces, as Sam has alluded to earlier in the presentation. And what tends to happen if we include food growing parks and green spaces, they become restricted spaces for those that are involved in the food growing, and not necessarily accessible spaces for the wider community. So we think it is a more successful initiative directed at housing estates. It's not to say we don't have food growing in our parks and green spaces. We do have 3 sites already with growing communities in Clissold, Allen Gardens and Springfield Parks. So it's not something we exclude from parks and green spaces, but we do believe it's better focused on housing estates. If I can use perhaps one example to answer a number of the questions around how do we make our spaces more inclusive, how do we design them to appeal to a wider audience, I want to use the recent example of the Shoreditch Park refurbishment projects that we're undertaking at the moment, just as a good example of how we intend to approach our parks projects going forward. And for those of you who don't know, we started with a blank sheet of paper. We went out to the local community, and it was very much the local community. And we held a huge number of consultation and engagement sessions, both online, in person, and focus groups. And we got 1,600 responses to that first stage of consultation from the local community. And a huge percentage of them were from children and young people, because we targeted those groups particularly, because they're often not heard in community consultation and engagement exercises. The second stage of consultation, when we've taken those responses and developed the outline design for the refurbished Shoreditch Park, went back out to consultation to make sure we'd got it right, and we got over 400 responses to that as well. That was slightly constrained by COVID. We couldn't do the level of engagement we'd done the first time, but the resounding, I suppose, response from the community was that we'd got it right. We'd listened to them and we responded. And the design now includes spaces, hopefully, that are accessible to everyone, but also appeal to that wide audience, Councillor Etty, in terms of there are the sports facilities, but there are areas to sit. There's a newly designed play area, there's new play trails, there's new walking routes, running routes around the park, there's areas to sit and be quiet and contemplate, new wildlife areas, etc. So we've tried to design a park that is suitable for as many groups as we possibly can within a constrained space, but it's hopefully a good example of how we will approach projects going forward to deliver the Parks and Green Spaces strategy, where we are engaging the community as a whole to tell us what they want from those spaces. We do have some bees in Parks and Green Spaces. We've got some at Hackney Marshes on the tree nursery. We've even got some, I believe, in the waste depot at Millfield as well. But there is a balance, believe it or not, in terms of bees, in terms of biodiversity and the prevalence of honeybees as well. So it is something we need to look at. And there's also some in St John's Churchyard now, I believe, as well. In terms of events, Councillor Rathbone, we appreciate it. The user groups particularly have found it challenging. we need to find a better balance. However, we also need to make sure those events are safe. Because if we're giving permission for somebody to run an event on our parks and green spaces, ultimately the liability rests with the council for approving that event. So we think we can find a better balance. There's already work going on in the events team to try and help that. And where a user group or a community group are struggling, we need to put more time and effort in to help them. But the key is that those events have to be appropriate for those green spaces as well. Coming back to one of the questions around volunteering, we're not working with Hackney Works on the volunteering specifically. We will link in with them, but we intend to employ a dedicated volunteering officer that will work with them. But what we are working with Hackney Works on is the apprenticeships. So when we integrate with the Housing Grounds Maintenance Service, we are intending to create a number of apprenticeship roles, and we will recruit for those apprenticeship roles through the Hackney Works team. For those of you who don't know, it is a particular problem in the horticultural sector. There's an ageing workforce, and we do need to attract new young people into the workforce, and the apprenticeship program is certainly a way we can do that much better than we have been over recent years. I'll stop there. Oh, cafes, final one. Yes, we do want to get more cafes and kiosks in our parks and green spaces. The last year has been challenging, obviously, for that. It's not been the right time to put out opportunities. We have a number of sites that we've identified that we will be, but we also have to go out to competitive tender for those concessions, but we will advertise them widely. There will be small scale opportunities. For example, there's a small old parkkeeper's hut in Haggerston Park, which we intend to put out for a concession opportunity. It will very much suit itself to a sole trader or startup business. And there's obviously bigger opportunities like Clissold Park in the future and the house that lend themselves to a slightly more established business. So we think there's a range of opportunities that will be attractive to both small businesses and slightly more medium-sized businesses going forward. So there is plans over the next year, COVID dependent, that we will put those opportunities out to the market and see if there's interest. We're obviously led by the market, and Millfield's, Councillor Rathbone, we've had many discussions about the potential for the kiosk at Millfield. We will be led by the market as to whether there's a viable business there or not.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Perhaps someone could talk through how we're going to integrate. I mean, I talked about the work in Millfield Park between housing estates and park, and the new green infrastructure between parks, housing estates. How we're going to make sure that tenants' voices are heard in the work that's going to go on in estates and in parks. Because I sometimes think, although we consult tenants, and I noticed that the Tenants and Residents Associations have responded to this consultation, often their voices don't get heard, or they may get heard about their own estate and not about wider issues.
Yeah, if I can come in there, I think that's a very good point, Councillor Patrick. We're really proud of the work that's been done in the States recently, aligning with this agenda, stuff in relation to the tree canopy, not using glyphosates, stuff around hedgerows, pictorial meadows. And I think we're already working quite closely with parks, but we're really looking forward to sort of joining up the grounds maintenance teams and sort of really pooling the expertise and pooling the resources around that. And I think that'll enable us to actually do a lot more with those spaces on housing estates. In terms of engagement with the residents, Sam came along to the RLG last week. I think it's probably fair to say it was a fairly robust discussion. And some of the residents reps expressing some concerns around whether this would encourage people to come onto, who didn't live on the estates, to come onto the estates, etc. So Sam was able to give them some reassurance about the extent to which any work on estates would be going via the TRAs and would be going via the existing resident engagement network. So that's always our commitment going forward. We'll definitely be looking to work with residents, definitely looking to work with residents groups about any changes that we're making on the estates.
Hello.
Hello, Chair.
Sorry, I wondered whether the Mayor wanted to come in. I don't know if Mayor Glanville wishes to come in.
I did. Ian took a lot of my thunder about combining some of the themes that were in the questions around what we were doing at Shoreditch Park. I suppose why I think that's also really important is the link into the Britannia project around toilets and the facilities. I know that's something that residents have talked about for years at that site, and I think the recognition of the things you need to make a park successful in terms of toilets, cafes, water fountains, inclusion in all of its broadest senses. I think the very, very best example we have is obviously that live work that's taken place in the co-production about Shoreditch Park, and that's captured, I think, children and young families, the work of the Youth Parliament and the work of older people. And I think what I hope people are hearing tonight is the coherence sitting under the green infrastructure strategy of the strategies you've seen this evening, but also thinking across to the work on Ageing Well and Hackney Young Futures and the synergies there. I very flippantly went and got my little jar of Millfield's honey. A real example, I think, of some of the produce being produced. I think back into what we were talking about in terms of estates and green spaces, that sense of ownership is absolutely critical. But I think there's also some challenging conversations that can be had in both directions. And it sounds like Sam got some of the challenging conversations coming back from the RLG. But also we know that estates often can sit very differently in the public realm. And there's been that long held aspiration, I think, from members about a seamless public realm with the same quality of planting and cleansing and all of that work that happens. But we know that also that places that feel comfortable, that people want to walk through, are safer. And so having really attractive estates and more attractive estates, as we've seen at King's Crescent, we've seen on the Pembury with Peabody, the work around planting and greening on Wenlock Barn, creating those moments where people want to go as they're walking their children home from school, those play opportunities, activating those playgrounds on our estates is really important too. There is a fine line, though, obviously, between creating destinations on our estates, which then leaseholders especially feel has an implication around charging and cleansing. And I think both on the housing side and the green spaces side, people are really cognizant of that dilemma and making sure that we get that right. The food growing movement that Ian talked about came often from our estates, and some of our very best, the work of this Scrutiny Commission on food growing a number of years ago now, but really being able to champion and come up with new opportunities for food growing. It's in the manifesto, but how to deliver that, I think that is also really important. And that again is an area where estates have done that bottom up. It's never been the case that we've designated areas on estates for food growing. It's residents coming to us and saying, this is a patch of green space that we think can be used differently, and Housing Services Hackney Homes being able to kind of respond to that and enable it to happen. I suppose my closing remark would be what I think we've heard this evening and what we're seeing taking place on the ground around a huge number of aspirations that we've set out in our own political manifesto, but also the aspirations of residents. We're seeing investment in play, in facilities, in greening, in biodiversity, and then that critical bit around volunteering and job opportunities. I know that it's a different scrutiny commission that looked at what is the sort of green dividend. Well, I think Ian has really talked vividly that those apprenticeships, those volunteering opportunities are a clear example of the green dividend spreading out beyond what we're just delivering in terms of the parks and green spaces. And that is a really exciting opportunity, I think, for Hackney to lead the way going forward and showing where those green jobs for the future can come from.
Thank you, Mayor Glanville. I've got Councillor Lynch and Councillor Ozen.
Thank you, Chair. I think Mayor Glanville's just spoken about. I just had sorry, I have to write things on post-it notes and do diagrams, and it's just 3 points I wanted to make. Was one around welcoming the fact that you featured quite heavily about the health, both physically and mentally, of this strategy, and I think that's incredibly important. And I think it's shown, particularly during the last 12 months, how important our parks have been. And I just thought it was quite interesting that, you know, our lead for health at Cabinet also has the lead for leisure as well, of which parks come under as a form of where people can go and like do other activities. My question, well, I suppose it's just an observation really, or it is a question, is around some of the risks of the parks in terms of wanting to expand, in terms of, sorry, Freddie's just barking, sorry, I'm just going to throw my dentist stick. Freddie, shush. Around the commercial opportunities that our parks have. Because in a previous life, when I was a councillor in Tower Hamlets, we did it's about over 10 years ago now, they did a big strategy on Victoria Park. And there was a big challenge there around people worrying about the park becoming sort of gentrified, essentially. People were worried that it would isolate other parts of the community. I just wondered what the strategy was doing in terms of trying to reduce that risk. I think there was obviously a change of leadership within that administration, which then unfortunately maximised the park for commercial profit, which caused untold misery to residents. And clearly, we hopefully won't be doing that. And also, I just wanted to pick up on this question around diversity. And I think, you know, Mayor Glanville just mentioned it, because I was just making some notes there around the need for this to link into the work that Councillor Woodley and Councillor Yvonne are doing in terms of the you know, our younger people and our older people, and making sure that the parks fit in with what their needs. But it sounds like I've got some assurance that all of that is happening at officer level, and I'm sure it's happening within Cabinet as well, that people are making sure that there's, rather than duplicating things, there's like a one voice around it. And that was it really. So yeah, thank you.
Councillor Oden.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. I actually, I like to ask this to Ian. Would it be possible, or would it be a good idea having the green gardens with green house in the parks, as many as possible, creating them to grow up our own sapling, like plant flowers, which can be provided to the residents who would like to get them with the donation, or maybe free, or whatever that happens. And also at the same time, in those places, there would be volunteering opportunities, and also some environmental and educational courses can be done at the small scale courses. Would it be a good idea? Thank you.
Councillor Patrick, do you want me to come in on those two questions?
Yes, please.
First of all, Councillor Lynch, I think you're absolutely right. It needs to be a very, very careful balance. And hopefully you've seen that over the last few years in Hackney's Parks and Green Spaces. We've tried to choose events, for example, the half marathon and the 10K, that are compatible with the Parks and Green Spaces. They're mass participation, but they are low impact, both on the Parks and Green Spaces and hopefully on residents, albeit that there are road closures associated with them. And that's the direction we've gone with. And where we have brought events into Parks and Green Spaces, we've very much sat down with the user groups first and foremost and had that conversation with the park user groups to try and find compatible events. It's fair to say that, you know, the events are an important part of Parks and Green Spaces. They bring communities together. They have many, many benefits, but it has to be in the right event in the right space. And hopefully you've seen that over the last few years from us. What I would also say is commercial opportunities do bring other opportunities for us, and a good example is cafe concessions. Whilst we cannot afford to put toilets in all our parks and green spaces, and we only have 8 toilet blocks in our 58 parks and green spaces, what we can do is, where we're looking at a cafe concession, we can put the onus on the cafe operator to provide a public toilet for the park and green spaces. And a good example is the project we're trying to deliver at Fairchild Gardens, which, for those of you who don't know, is off Hackney Road. And part of that is a container cafe concession with a toilet designed in. But the toilet will be looked after by whoever is successful in obtaining the cafe concession. So I think you need to use some of those commercial opportunities to deliver some of our wider objectives, and the council then doesn't have to meet the cost and ongoing revenue costs of those opportunities. In terms of the sort of green gardens element, unfortunately, the days of local authorities running nurseries and growing opportunities has largely passed. Now, some still do, but you tend to need to do it on scale. And again, that would be at the loss of potentially green space for other opportunities. But where we do have excellent groups in the borough are groups like Growing Communities that do provide training opportunities for people on growing opportunities, mainly around fruit and vegetables. But there are those opportunities in our parks and green spaces, working with some of our other stakeholders to do that. But at the moment, there aren't any plans to go into sort of nursery provision, given the space it would require for us.
Thank you. As the councillor for Kings Park Ward, it'd be amiss of me, sorry, not to mention Kings Park moving together, and some of the work, that's, just people who don't know, that's the Sport England money that came for trying to get people in Kings Park Ward to do more physical activity. And some of the research which has obviously been taken on board in this strategy to get people to leave their homes and to do physical activity, not necessarily sport. I just wondered what we've learnt from the results that have come out so far and how we've taken them on board. I mean, one of the things that come out was that although Hackney Marshes are on the doorstep of many of our residents, many residents have never been on the marshes or barely know they exist. And other things that need to be taken into account, like lighting and accessibility, to get people to use our green spaces. And I mean, I'm very fond of all our green spaces, but people are sometimes wary and need help or advice in how to access our green spaces. Also, what other things that came out was things like table tennis tables. There's not wooden ones, but I know there's one on Homerton High Street in the park, the pocket park that belongs to Lindsay Estate. I think it's made out of stone or concrete, and then people just bring their bats. But we do need to think, yeah, it's great if there's lots going on and there's lots of good work going on. I just wondered what we've learned from what residents are actually saying to us in the Kings Park moving together research that's been done by the volunteers.
I can come back on that, Councillor Patrick. Interestingly, Councillor Patrick, the meeting I just had before coming into this meeting with Lola, who's as you know, the head of programme for Kings Park Moving Together. So we are working with Lola and the team from Kings Park Moving Together to look at opportunities, because what's become clear from the community engagement they've done is the space that the local community values Daubney Fields. Perhaps less so the marshes, and their focus and their desire to have improvements on Daubney Fields. So we've started that process with the new play area, which has been hugely well received in the space, and massively increase usage of that space. We are looking at potential improvements to the skate park as well. We are looking in conjunction with Kings Park moving together around opportunities like outdoor gyms, but also in terms of new pathways in the space to help the community get from one side of the space to the other through active transport, as opposed to having to walk around the space on a wet day and the grass is wet, because as you well know, there aren't clear routes through the space. So we've also been talking to Lola about potential use of the canal for the local community to utilise cheap water sport opportunities down there as well. So there's an awful lot of discussions going on from the community research done by Lola and the team about mainly around how we can improve Daubney for the local community and for them to use it more for their health and well-being.
Thank you. Could I ask about water sports? Because you've mentioned it. We have got the Lee Rowing Club, and I think it's a canoeing club in Springfield, and then we've got the Burnham Boat Club that do excellent work. And I just wonder, though it's not green, but they do run through our waterways are mentioned in our green infrastructure, and how we can use them more. I did see this summer lots of people out in little boats bobbing along the canal and along the River Lee as well. I just wondered how we can support people to use our green waterways safely, but also enjoy them more.
I think I'd add another group, Councillor Patrick, to your list, which is Leaside as well, who are near Springfield, who do some absolutely fantastic work with young people. What I would say is, as I'm sure you know, all of the waterways in the borough are the responsibility of the Canal and Riverside Trust, not the council. But that doesn't say we can't work with CART to try and open up opportunities. And as I said, one of the conversations we were having with Lola around Kings Park moving together was the opportunity of trying to introduce more water sports for the local community around Kings Park, utilising the council's riverbank access to Lee navigation.
Thank you. Do any other members have any questions or want to come in?
Could I come in, please, Sharon? It's
Yes,
Councillor Root, sorry.
Yeah.
I've got a few questions, actually. First of all, I just wanted to make the observation of how fantastically well the departments have worked, I think, over the last year, coping with all the COVID challenges and what have you. And, you know, I think one of the perhaps unexpected upshots of it is that people are even more affectionate towards their green spaces than they were before, which is obviously a good thing. But I have absolutely no doubt will produce more challenges for you over the coming years, because people are more involved and they were more opinionated perhaps than they were before. I just wanted to ask whether or not well, I'm lucky enough to live between Victoria Park and Wells Street Common, so I've got no shortage of green space. We've talked about commercial activities, and obviously Victoria Park has been at one end of that extreme, which has caused us some problems. But at the other side of it, there's various community activities which happen quite regularly on Wells Street Common, including the Wells Street Common Festival, which is very much a community organised event and has been organised by a sort of similar group of people now for over 10 years. And they've got quite a lot of expertise at doing that. And it just occurred to me that I know that the council runs at least a couple of workshops every year for organisations which are interested in applying for community grants, the community chest grants and the community grants and what have you, to basically explain to smaller organisations how they can go about making their applications and what have you. And I wondered if we do anything similar for any of the friends groups or community groups who might be interested in doing something on any of our green spaces, just to sort of walk them through best practice, the sorts of considerations they need to have. And if we don't do that, maybe that's something we could think about. And I'm sure actually the people who organise the Wells Street Common Festival would be very happy to come along and contribute some of their experience as well, if that was useful. Moving on, I just wanted to think a bit about older people's activities. We've talked about diverse communities, but I'm also very aware that the busier that parks get, and this is particularly the case obviously during COVID, perhaps older people are a bit more fearful about using parks. And I noticed that things like the bowling green in Springfield Park is no longer with us. I just wonder, whilst, you know, I really love the table tennis tables and the chess places and what have you, I think that's all fantastic. And obviously chess is something that perhaps some of the older people take up. I just wonder if we're thinking about any particular activities which are of special interest to older people. And I think gardening clubs, you know, could be along those lines, which moves me on to the next point, which is about growing food on the estates. You know, there are some great examples of community gardens, like Bannister House in Homerton has got a great community allotment almost really in there on that estate. But I also know that on Frampton Park, there is an appetite for more food growing space, but also there's a fear amongst some residents there about losing their green space that is just green space, or which is flower garden, sort of flower meadows in the summertime, which look really lovely. So there's quite a difficult balance, it seems to me, to please everybody. And I'm slightly worried that we might go too much over to the food growing side of things on the estates and just lose green space, which is sort of nothing more than recreation space, really. And on that subject, I mean, how do we really get people involved in the steering groups for these things? How are those people recruited? Is it just through the TRAs, or are there other ways of reaching out to people? An organisation, I don't know if you know about it, which has reached out to me recently, is a not-for-profit organisation called Allot Me, which is seeking to help grow more food on public land throughout London. They've got some really good ideas. They've also got some money to put into things. So if you're not working with them, then perhaps I could introduce them to you. I've nearly finished, don't worry. I was also just going to mention cafes. I wonder if we're not being quite ambitious enough about the recycling and what have you. I noticed that the strategy document says something about not seeking to use non-recyclable plastics. But I just wonder, you know, if we're having more cafes, I'm concerned about the rubbish, I'm concerned about the packaging. I just wonder if we could really, really be proactive in how we're trying to minimize rubbish and encourage recycling. In fact, using those cafes perhaps as a way to educate people about recycling. And finally, slightly cheeky question, what are we going to do about London Fields, aka Benidorm in the summer? Is there any sort of strategy about dealing with the overuse of London Fields, really, and trying to spread people out into some of our other green spaces? Finished.
Thank you, Councillor. That was quite a lot of questions. I'm sure officers will take them all down and will respond. I don't know who wants to go first.
I'll respond on some of them in terms of the parks related ones.
Thank you.
In terms of cafes, Councillor, we run all our specifications for our cafes past the environmental sustainability team. So they input, as we do with public health. So we have to obviously tread a balance between the viability of the concessionary offer, but all of those go past them, and we will be led by them in terms of what we put in those specifications in terms of recycling. And as you know, they're very ambitious and have very ambitious aspirations for the borough and our recycling targets. So we'll be led by them what we put in our concessions, certainly the ones coming up. In terms of events best practice, We have helped and assisted in terms of documentation previously, and our support has tended to be on a one-to-one basis. But I had a conversation with our events team earlier in the year, actually, to do exactly what you've talked about, which is workshops for a wider range of organisations. So not only can they learn from us, but they can learn from each other, as you suggested, in terms of the established groups in the borough that are putting on events and have been through the process many times. London Fields, I think possibly the mayor or Alid might want to say something on that, but we do have plans in train to put plans in place for this summer to try and manage many of the issues that we experienced this year. And activities for older people. There used to be a number of bowls greens in the borough. They generally have been unused for probably well over 10 years now, mainly because they just weren't getting heavily used and they weren't sustainable on the usage levels. So we are looking at alternative provision for them. So the one at Springfield, for example, will be used as a sort of bookable space for activities. But we do put on activities for older people in our spaces. Yes, it's mainly around walking and safe access routes, new age games. Our programme for 50 plus utilises our parks and green spaces a lot, and has been during COVID, particularly as they've not been able to access leisure centres or community halls. But certainly as part of the parks and green spaces strategy, we kind of look at if there is a demand for anything further.
Thank you. Has anyone got an answer? Everything wants coming in on the London Fields issue. Does the mayor come in on that? Or Alid?
Probably come in on that. Yes, we are fully understand the situation we were facing last year was absolutely appalling in London Fields. We did bring enforcement, more enforcement resources in, but what we've tried to do this year is to preempt the issues which we will have. And I think what you've got at the moment is probably a perfect storm. It's because people are being caged in for the next month and a half. And when the first warm weather comes in April, I expect to see quite a lot of release of frustration and people going to London Fields. So we are carried out a London Fields conversation with local residents and how they see London Fields and what are their main priorities. We've taken those responses into consideration, and we are preparing a briefing note to how we are going to deal with some of the issues we faced in London Fields last summer, and how we resource it so that we can mitigate a lot of the issues which we saw. So we are preempting at the moment, but we have a very, very good resident liaison with residents around London Fields in order to find a way forward. But I do expect another very busy spring and summer in London Fields, but we're doing a lot of work in the background now in order to resource that properly.
So on the back of that, Alid, although London Fields was the worst hit by overuse, I mean, there was some inappropriate use on Hackney Marshes as well, and I don't know about other parks. So are we planning this strategy to take into account, even in Dalbany Fields, there was parties going on all night and things, which has never happened before?
Yeah, we are looking at all the parks, as Ian experienced. Hackney Marshes, we had a lot of unlicensed music events. Dalbany Fields, we had Hackney Downs, we had Millfield's Park as well. We had quite a lot of issues there. So we are looking across increasing enforcement and working with the police along those parks for the next spring, summer. But I think the London Fields was hit harder than mostly because Broadway, and fundamentally because some of the commercial premises along Broadway were selling takeaway alcohol, and that was the fuel for the antisocial behaviour we saw. So we haven't forgotten all the other parks. It's just we decided to do a London Fields conversation in order to find a way forward with London Fields.
I've got Councillor Rathbone. Did you want to come in, or you still got your hand up from earlier?
No, that's I put my hand up afresh. It's a fresh hand there.
More chestnuts.
No,
They're not roasted.
Okay. I'm only trying to be topical when I talk about chestnuts. That's all, because I know these parks people, you know, they like to hear about nature. I just wondered about the 7 wards on the west side of the borough. Are obviously deficient in green spaces and so on. What exactly was envisaged to try and tackle that? And kind of allied to that is that I was wondering how, as it were, the west side might be linked to the more leafy side of the east side of the borough. How could there be, like, literally trails, green trails or something that might help people to know that they can go to, there is a green space quite near them, although there's not one most immediate, that they've only got to go through a couple of roads and then they're there. So I wondered what that was. And then just another question is kind of loosely linked to it, which is just that is there going to be much more in the way of notices in parks and leaflets? Because I'm still a leaflet person, I have to tell you, as indeed quite a few people in the borough are, about what exactly each space offers. You know, well, what its greenery is, what the foliage and the fauna and wildlife and so on, because I think that helps people to value the space much more. It's not just a piece of grass with a couple of trees and a bush, but it is actually, you know, a real living environment, a whole world in itself. So I wondered how that might be tackled.
Thank you. I've got cancer.
I can answer the question on the notices, and then maybe Matthew and Sam can respond on the Green Links, Councillor.
Okay.
So lots of our green space parks have got park management plans with lots of information about those parks, and my team's been working to translate that into quite accessible, readable posters, which we are in the process of putting up in park notice boards at the moment. So that gives members of the public information on what's in the park and also what improvements we'll be making to the park in the near future. And then where we've got park-specific improvement projects like Springfield Park and Abney Park, we are looking at better interpretation there. So we just had a meeting this week looking at Springfield Park and what the interpretation boards are going to look like to give people a bit of a richer history for their green spaces. And also we're creating activity packs for local schools as well to run self-led trails around our parks to teach children what's in our parks and green spaces.
Thank you. Councillor Ette, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just a quick one, Chair. I just wanted, you know, with regards to those MUGA facilities that are not up to standard, you know, we still have some. Is there any time frame of when we think this could be put, this could be, I mean, things could improve with those areas, like Warwick Grove, St. John's Courts, I mean, those ones that has been mentioned, those exceptions. Thanks.
Do you want to reply first?
Chair, could I just say that not all of my previous question was answered either. I think maybe somebody else was going to come in after Sam, because I was asking about the deficiency of green space and opportunity on the west side of the borough.
Yeah, I can answer that, Councillor Patrick. I mean, I think there's a recognition, because of the level of density, housing density in the west of the borough, it is hugely challenging. And I think probably the things that are going to, I think there's a distinction between sort of accessible green space and just green space. And I'm not sure from your perspective, Councillor Rathbone, I think you were talking probably about, were you predominantly talking about accessible green space that would be accessible to members of the community?
Yes.
Yeah, in the broadest sense. And so I think probably the options for that is potentially how we negotiate on new developments as part of the growth that's foreseen in some of those locations, particularly in the south and in Dalston. I think also we need to be much more innovative in terms of how we look at highways, in terms of repurposing and things like that. I think obviously low traffic neighbourhoods, and they're in an experimental phase at the moment, but they are the beginning of potentially of a journey looking at how we make different uses of space, and actually trying to move that dialogue onto what are some of the wider benefits that might come out of a low traffic neighbourhood that actually, if it does become installed in the future, how we sort of soften the entrances around parks, how we even repurpose existing highway space. I won't make promises because Ian's in the room about thing, and I think we need to be mindful about if we are creating new space and things like that on repurposed highways, how that would be managed and maintained and how we would finance that. But I think there is a recognition in areas of key deficiency, such as in the south and the west, that we are going to have to look at some things in terms of over the future period, not necessarily in the next immediate few years, but as a long-term requirement for those locations, particularly because there's going to be an increase in density as a result of some of those developments. So I haven't got all the answers for you, Councillor Rathbone, on that one, but hopefully you'll feel that there is some thinking going on about how we do that, because I think it's about accessible open space that is the real issue. And we know that there's challenges around just saying housing open space and how we make use of that. I think David's already said how we work with TRAs and how we make best use of that space, recognising that they're part of housing estates. And so I think we need to look at all that in the round. In terms of green links, I mean, I could say a little bit about it, but maybe Sam Griffiths from AECOM, because we have been looking at links and corridors as part of this work. I don't know if Sam's still on the call. I think he is.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that, Matthew. It's I mean, in the presentation earlier, I mentioned we've got a series of objectives, and you picked up one of those as particularly addressing that the deficiency in the south and the west, and one of the key means is to where we can't have new green spaces, to promote new green links. And I mentioned we've got opportunities, and really those opportunities could be across the borough, but we're focusing as a priority within the strategy in these areas of need. So, for example, if Matthew was talking about low traffic neighbourhoods, there's many, but we're going to focus our attention within the strategy where there's the most need identified. The green links, for an example, is where these opportunities overlay. So we've been overlaying mapping layers, and where there's a need, and then where there's different assets that we can join up with either low traffic neighbourhoods or certain streets that meet the right proportions, or where we've got opportunities in terms of perhaps looking at how we use car parking spaces, things like that. We're trying to utilise all of those opportunities to create new green links, and then to tie into the wider network. So, for example, if we can get people up to the towpath of the Regent's Canal, then you can get across to, say, all the way to Victoria Park, for an example. So it's trying to get those small steps to link people to the wider network where we can't deliver new green space on the doorstep.
Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry, Chair, could I just say something, because I keep forgetting to say this. It's just congratulations to ALED, Ian and Sam and the rest of the team, because, you know, we sort of forget to say it really, but you have helped to maintain a wonderful green borough, and, you know, we've got some wonderful spaces, and I really do appreciate it, and I know many do. So just keep up the good work, and all those green flags, the increasing green flags that we've had. It is a wonderful job at a very difficult time. So please don't think that we're in any way negative about things. We just want to build on that improvement. But I can say that you've already done a really great job. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll bring the mayor in, then perhaps if the gentleman, I can't pronounce your name, sorry, from planning wanted to come in. Since you're on the call, I'd just like perhaps you to pick up the point of new developments and how we can plan perhaps new neighbourhoods with green spaces. I know we're short of space, but how we can ensure that new developments have enough green space. But I know the mayor wants to come in, and then I'll take you, and then I'll take a couple of other questions, and then we'll wind this up, this part of the meeting up.
Thanks, Chair. And hopefully what I've got to say sort of sandwiches neatly between what Sam's just said and what Carol might come on to say from a planning perspective. I think the deficit in the west of the borough and in some of those key wards is going to be met in a variety of different ways. Crucial to that is the repurposing of street space, and that will be incremental. So we know what some of that can look like. I think there's been a hugely impressive rollout of SUDs and urban planting in and around some of our key streetscape schemes, and that is about creating those biodiversity interventions, sustainable urban drainage, but also beauty. I think there is some element of having to change what our our expectations of kind of beauty look like. So it's not going to always be the ornamental planting that historically would have been kind of picked up on, but actually the diversity of our street trees combined with those spaces will have for generations to come, a fundamentally different layout to what people expect. You can see that on Queensbridge, you can see that on Mare Street, and you'll be able to see that, I think, even more vividly at Culverston when we do the 21st Century Street there. And there's obviously the potential to take some of those lessons further onto our estates and improve greening there. The biggest regeneration project in the borough is Woodbury Down. Most recently controversial in terms of the Happy Man tree, but actually step back a second and think about the fact that this is a tripling of the density of the residential there, but actually a large increase in usable public green space that is ultimately comes back to the council. So it's not privatised green space, but really usable urban parks that link the reservoirs and those communities together. And that has only been possible because of the master plan work that's gone on as a partnership, but also the challenge from planning about the types of spaces that we want to see. There's also recognition there around Mugas and the value of the cage and the Muga in the urban realm, making sure that those green spaces aren't just ornamental, but actually work for residents and different groups of residents in an intergenerational way. And I think you can see those interventions all across the sort of western border of the borough, and also how emerging planning policy treats the deficit of green space in Dalston, coming out of the Dalston conversation, valuing things like the Eastern Curve, but going further than that and thinking about the connectivity and those opportunities to introduce further planting. And you'll see that both, I think, at Ridley and in Arcola Street as part of some of the greening of some of those public squares and spaces in the future. So there's been a huge amount of learning and best practice, and a lot of that is in LP33, and thinking also about how development can create inclusive spaces. So I think we had really strong policies on play and greening, but sometimes that was like behind the gate. We want to see more of the development improving green infrastructure and play in the public realm and the existing areas that already exist. And you can see some of those lessons, I think, at King's Crescent, again, another regeneration piece that created really inclusive public realm. And the second phase of that won't just have a brand new green in the heart of the estate. It will also have an inclusive Muga space as well, comparatively close to Clissold Park, but very clearly residents said that they wanted to see that near their homes and create usable green spaces right on their doorstep. And that was incredibly important to them as well.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Chair, just on the point about London Fields and enforcement, I've obviously seen some of the outcomes of the consultation from London Fields. We should remember that while we want to do more as custodians of our public realm, and we recognise the term that Penny used earlier, Councillor used earlier, there is a cost to education and enforcement, and we're going to have to recognise that as an authority, that if we want to manage a space like London Fields, or even some of the challenges that I know Ian deals with day in, day out around breakages into our sports and Muga facilities during lockdown, that it isn't easy and sustainable to just have an enforcement response. We're going to need residents to support us as we maintain those inclusive spaces for everyone coming out of the lockdown period. We can't just employ private security sort of capacity indefinitely support the work of our parks and enforcement teams.
Thank you, Mayor Glanville. Carol, did you want to say something on planning? Did you want to pick up?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to thank the Mayor for making my task a very easy one. You articulated it extremely well. Thank you. The deficiencies in open space, absolutely. The planning system in its role in guiding and managing new development is well placed to sort of tackle that, and Hackney is very fortunate in having LP33 already adopted and a whole suite of new area-based plans that are coming forward that will hopefully do that. The growth that we are planning for across the borough does provide us with an opportunity through our growth strategy, our planning policies, and our site allocations to hopefully deliver on some of those deficiencies and make right the level of provision. There is a tension, and I think others have touched on this, around the sort of the scale of growth, and how we accommodate and embed new open space and green infrastructure within that scale of growth. And I believe Woodbury Downs is a good example of how the council is applying its planning policies, particularly those around the design of new developments to optimise opportunities and ensure that all new infrastructure networks are fit for purpose for the growth that's taking place in the borough. I hope that's helpful for members.
Thank you. Unless anybody's got anything urgent to say, I don't know if Ali, as the director, you wish to say anything to wrap up, or?
No, I think we've covered everything now. There's nothing else I can say.
Thank you. I don't know if the mayor wants to say anything more, or?
No, just it's incredibly it's an honour to keep the seat warm for the next cabinet member for green spaces and parks, and I think it's testament to the combined work of the different parts of the council and the people that are working with us to develop these strategies that we have had such a brilliant discussion about this work over the past hour, 2 hours in fact, and that probably we have the best team in London, if not the country, doing this work. So just thanks to them.
Thank you. I do think we have a brilliant parks team, and we have brilliant parks. And I think perhaps everybody's the one thing perhaps has come out of the pandemic is that more people have realised how brilliant our parks are.
Yeah.
And the only thing that I feel is that if with even more money, our parks could be even more brilliant. We could do all the things that we want to do tomorrow, rather than have to try and find the money to do them. I do want to thank members. I'm going to take a 5-minute comfort break, and we're going to resume at 9 o'clock to go through the minutes. I should say that our discussion today, myself and Tracy will work out what's come out of it and feed it into the consultation, so that it will come part of the formal consultation on parks and green spaces and our green infrastructure. And I think I could probably say on behalf of the committee that we welcome the consultation, and we think that it's a really good consultation and the ideas are really good, and we look forward to being put into practice on behalf of the commission. So I'm going to call a 5-minute break till 9 o'clock. So it's slightly more than 5 minutes, but till 9 o'clock.
And I'm just off to roast all my chestnuts now.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Aled. Thanks, Sam. Thank you so much for all the hard work. And
we gone live again?
Looks like it.
Yes, we have. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for resuming and coming back so promptly. I gather that comfort breaks are going to be built into agendas in future. Right, thank you very much for that. Right, can we agree the minutes of the last meeting, which was on homelessness and the new housing strategy that we discussed? And myself and Tracy will meet up and work up the discussion into some recommendations to go into the consultation on the housing strategy and the housing waiting list. We've got the work programme. We've got 2 further meetings for this municipal year, one in February and one in March. In February, Tracy, where's the digital divide? I can't see it.
It's due to be in the February meeting,
Yeah.
but we're just finalising attendees.
Yeah,
It's due to be the libraries.
I did right. I'm trying for the February meeting to enable us to discuss the digital divide. I don't know about you, but I think almost every meeting I've gone to, the digital divide has been mentioned as a growing problem. But I'm having problems getting the officers to attend. I did invite the officers and got a reply from the director of IT saying, could he postpone it to the new financial year? And I've wrote back and said no. I don't often do that with officers, but I do think that we, as members, we really should start to look at it and see what response. Councillor Lynch. Yes, on mute.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sorry, I know you've just said about the minutes, but I've just noticed in the minutes it says the CCG chair. It's actually the CCG managing director.
Right. Thank you. All right. So do you think we should be discussing the digital divide?
Well, is the digital? Sorry, I don't have anything like that on my agenda.
No, it's tonight. We're trying to. I'm trying to get the digital divide on our agenda for February, and I'm discussing with officers who are reluctant to come due to the amount of work they've got. I have said to officers that all I want is a side or 1 or 2 sides of A4. I don't necessarily need a complicated report. It's more about the discussion that we can have as members to find out what's happening in the borough and what the council can do. So I am pressing officers to come in February so that we can actually discuss that. I'm just letting you know it's not on the agenda because officers haven't confirmed attendance yet, but I am pushing officers to attend. Apart from that, we've got an update on the carnival, which we discussed January 2020, which physically never happened. It was meant to happen online. I didn't watch it online, and I don't know what happened online. I think we ought to find out what happened online and find out what plans they're making this year. I hope by September it should be able to go ahead, but you never know what's going to happen with COVID, so it'd be interesting to find out what plans they've got, and also whether they took on board any of our recommendations for engaging in wider communities like schools and housing tenants, which they seem reluctant to do. And we've got the libraries and our strategies for libraries and getting them reopened in February, and in March we've got the housing. We've got an item on the council's lifts main payment contract, because there's been lots of issues with lifts breaking down and stranding residents. It won't be a major item because they're actually out to tender at the moment for a new contract, because the previous contractors resigned the tender because they couldn't fulfil it. We're also hoping for an update from Thames Water on the flood in M4. We said we'd ask them to come back in 6 months' time. And then we've got the resident engagement work, which we've been monitoring, and hopefully some of it's been done. And I've asked officers to come back on that to find out where we are on resident engagement. So that's what we're planning for the next 2 meetings. Has anybody got anything they want to say or suggestions?
Sorry, I know I missed a bit of it. Sorry, I was just finishing roasting off those chestnuts. But I did send you something about the police commander had done some policy, and I do think we need to look at that on handcuffs.
Yeah, I agree entirely. I was going to suggest that perhaps the first meeting of the new municipal year.
The new municipal year.
That we go back to our work on stop and search and handcuffs. But yeah, Ian kindly sent me some stuff at the Met are looking at it. And I think that would be about 6 months from our last look at the item. So hopefully there should be some progress for them to report back on, and we can discuss. So I do think May or June, whenever the first meeting will be, because I haven't seen a draft of next year's meetings yet.
I'm not sure if it's our area or not, but I was just wondering about what Robert Jenrick's been saying about renaming spaces and what have you. I kind of feel that we should be being a bit proactive and fighting back, and I wonder if we could have an update on that and have a bit of an opportunity for some comment on it at some point.
Yeah.
And the other thing I was wondering about was, I suppose, the arts and cultural sector generally, which has been so incredibly badly hit by COVID. And if we could perhaps have a look. I mean, it's a little bit, I think you're a bit over optimistic, Sharon, to think that the carnival's going to be happening in September. I don't think it will be this year. But, and I think that lots of the venues and what have you will only be open in a sort of funny sort of piecemeal way. But I think it might be worth, given how important the arts are in Hackney, for us to have a look at that at some point.
Well, it may be that we could perhaps touch on it briefly. I need Tracy's on the call. Whether we could ask Guy, who is responsible for arts and culture, to expand his presentation and take in arts and culture as well as touching on the carnival at the next meeting.
I think that could work, couldn't it? Because they do tie together, obviously.
Yeah.
I think so as well. Yeah.
I mean, the carnival is arts and culture, so we could ask them to expand on it and talk about how COVID has hit the arts and culture sector in the borough. We know how it's affected it nationally, and who got grants and who didn't get grants, and who do we think is going to survive. I mean, it's tragic to see that the Hackney Empire has been dark for months and months and months. So I don't know how they survive, and I haven't heard anything. I think they probably did get the grant. I don't know, but I know lots of smaller venues are also struggling. But I mean,
I think most of them have got like survival grants, which just kind of keep them sitting there. Yeah. But I think that when they're eventually able to open again, depending on how many people they're able to take in, for some of them it won't be viable to open again if they can only have 50% capacity. And I also think that the competition is going to be really, really fierce as well. So I think it's going to be quite difficult. I wouldn't be surprised if we lose some venues, I must say.
And it may be that some might want to plan. It may be that outdoor activities could take place sooner than indoor activities, and it might be that some of our arts and cultural venues might want, perhaps, I don't know, planning outdoor activities rather than indoor activities for the summer. It's not like linked, but we gave a license to a venue down in Hackney Wick to license their outdoor space so that they can earn some money in the summer because they haven't been able to use their indoor space. I mean, this is a drinking space, but they are an arts and cultural venue, but they basically had to turn themselves into a pub, if you want to call it that, to earn some money to support the rest of the arts and cultural work they do. So yeah, we can add that in. I'm sure Guy would be only happy to expand on that. And then we'll do the thing on the lift. It came from Councillor Peters. James asked me for us to have a look at it, and it goes back to the work that we've done in the past in this commission. Sometimes before many of you joined, when we've been looking at council contracts, we did the work where we found out that the council electrical contract wasn't working, and in the end, the council got rid of its electrical contractor.
Yes.
Him remember that?
Yeah, good piece of scrutiny commission work, Chair.
It was. Councillor Lynch.
I've just noticed, are we not trialling the reduced refuge collections in the next couple of weeks? I just saw something. So I wondered whether or not we might want to plan for having a look at how that goes. I know we've obviously looked at it in a previous commission, didn't we, with our previous cabinet lead, around how that would work on particular roads that are able to have, are they having more recycling and less black bin collections?
Yes.
So that might be something for the future. I'm just mindful of stuff that's actually relevant, not relevant, but some stuff that's in our residents' interests at the moment, if that makes sense. It's relevant to them, and I just think things like that is relevant to quite a lot of our residents as well. And it's not just, like lifts might not be relevant to some of our residents.
Yeah.
But I agree with them about the arts and cultures. I think that would be very useful, because there's obviously going to have to be there is probably going to have to be a long-term decision around the carnival, wasn't there? That was very much alluded to, wasn't it, last year? So it would be an opportunity to, regardless of COVID, I think there was concerns around the future of the carnival in regard to the public safety concerns that we as a borough have to recognise and balance. So it is worth doing that. I think Penny's quite right. I think we're being very optimistic. I just think you also, my question about the digital divide, Sharon, I'm not quite sure what you're wanting to do about that, because the digital divide is a term to describe quite a lot of inequity across our residents, and I suspect that maybe the Young People's Commission, and maybe be looking at that from the school's point of view, because that's where it seems to be. I mean, if it's in terms of how we do our communications, and that there's a fear that some of our residents that may not have online activity, or they don't have devices within their homes, that might link to some of the work that Councillor Maxwell's doing with the Aging Well strategy. I just think that, I know you're talking about the officers, but I'm not quite sure what officers because I don't think it would really come up. I would like to think that we aren't involving our IT colleagues at the moment, because obviously they've got other pressing matters at the moment, which I think we should be supporting them to prioritise, given what's been happened with the cyber attack.
It's not only about, children's services have picked up children, but almost to apply for anything from the government these days, almost any benefit you need to be online, and many of our residents aren't online, and many of the places that they use to access their online services like libraries are shut. I do think the council has a role in...
But there's nothing we can do about that. I mean, there's obviously all mitigation that we can do, but I just think generally, given the stress that the council's under at the moment, I know what you're trying to say, but we can't, the council will do as much as they can. I think there's probably, I heard somewhere that they are increasing production of paper communications at the moment for that. I just think, given what's happening at the moment, it might be worth prioritising things that, I don't know, it's up to you, your chair.
No, it's a democracy.
Can I just come in quickly with regards to digital? That was actually discussed at the last Children and Young People Scrutiny Commission, and they talked about the shortages in terms of thousands. And as at the last meeting, there was evidence from Oswick School that they received like 200, and other schools were coming, and others were receiving as well. So in a way, it's a gradual thing. I think it's going around. And with regards to those who do not have Wi-Fi or internet, and that's why majority of them are going to school. So we have increase in number of children going to school, not only the key workers going to school at the moment. But I think it's still worth, even if the officers are so busy they can't come, at least they can still send probably something across to us.
Actually, isn't there something about broadband I saw this week?
Yeah, there's a meet.
Yeah, so that's something. That's something about the broadband. That would make sense. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
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 On Thursday at 5:30.
Yeah. Yes.
Chair, how about
sorry, 6 o'clock on Wednesday.
I was going to say that it's 6 o'clock on Wednesday.
Yeah. Sorry.
Chair, how about LTN?
And was that Tuesday? We've got prevent training as well this week, haven't we?
Yes.
Was that tomorrow?
Chair, I think Councillor Ozen was asking a question.
Sorry, Councillor Ozen.
Is it possible to talk about LTN's effect and updates and LTN? No.
They don't come under our commission. They come under work, skills and transport.
Okay.
Oh yes, it's transport, isn't it?
Yeah. It used to come under us, but it doesn't come under us anymore. I remember. I think they discussed it in November. I think there was a commission discussed it then. So unfortunately, it doesn't come under our terms of reference. Shall I ask housing to, since the IT department are busy with the restructure, putting back together our IT. If we had a briefing from housing about the work that they're doing in putting in IT into our council blocks and our community facilities, if we structure it like that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Weren't we going to hear back about the review on community halls? I mean, it may be that the thing has been shelved because of COVID, but there's also a kind of a question as to how we kind of start to reopen the community halls and what have you, and ease them back into use again. I just wonder if it might be timely to get Gilbert back.
We could do that with the resident engagement. We could have a brief update because they fit together. Because originally we did resident engagement and the community halls together, but I've got the impression that the community halls restructured had halted somewhere along the line because of COVID. But we can ask them for an update because part of the plans, I think, when we discuss the digital divide and the work they're doing, part of that covers the community halls, of them putting Wi-Fi into our community halls, so that our residents can use community halls to access Wi-Fi. And there's also, I believe, they've been talking to some Wi-Fi companies who I think they've done a deal with. I think we can hear about it. Who can offer a broadband at very modest prices for our residents. So I think we'll hear about that when we hear about the Wi-Fi from housing at the next meeting. So if we have the housing officers in about at the next meeting to discuss Wi-Fi in council blocks and community halls, and we'll ask Guy to come and talk to us about arts and culture as well as the carnival, and what will happen to the carnival, whether they found it was worth doing online, and if so, are they going to replicate it this year if they can't have carnival? Because even if they can have the physical carnival by September, I don't know whether they would have been able to do the work. You're right there, cats are out. So we can ask them what's going on. We'll have a brief update on the lift repair contract and what they're going to do, because it's about, it's not on the list breaking down, it's the aspects of the list breaking down and residents being trapped in their properties, not being able to get out or not being able to get back in, and how we as a council or a housing provider make sure that either people who are trapped in their properties are given the provisions for services that they might need if we can't enable them to get out, to make sure they can get shopping or whatever it is they need, or if they're trapped outside, how we can enable them to get back inside. Councillor Owes and then Councillor Leach, you still got your hand up from before, you wouldn't come in? No. Councillor Ozen.
I'm okay.
Okay,
well, that's it. Thank you everybody for coming.
Sorry, Chair. I just wanted to. So I've just started to look at again at the stuff that we got from the police commander.
Yeah.
And there's quite a number of recommendations. I'm just, in a way, I'm a bit surprised that they haven't. I know they've kind of notified us as individuals through the reporting process that they use, but I would have liked to, for the Commission, in view of the discussions that we have had with them, to notify us of what they're doing. So is it possible? I know this is the trouble with the reviews, is to do half an hour on just for them to tell us that what they're exactly doing, and then continue as you were saying in the new municipal year. I just feel that maybe the public would like us to, as it were, notice that at least this process was going on. And the second one about ethnicity of vehicle stops is just very worrying to me, in view of the discussion that we had about how do you tell somebody's ethnicity and the kind of response that we got before. So sorry, I know I'm putting a bit of a spoke in the works, but it's just concerning, and I know it will be concerning to quite a number of residents as well.
Ian, have you had something from the police then about the?
Yes, yeah, I think you would have got it as well. We all get it as councillors.
I don't think I have actually.
Maybe I haven't checked my mail.
When recently?
Does it come through the post or an email?
No, it's an email.
It came about the handcuffs.
I don't think I've had that. When did it come in? Just so
I'm not sure I've seen that.
About 2 weeks ago. It's executive summary, review of pre-arrest handcuffing in the Metropolitan Police Service. And then it's a whole report with all kinds of recommendations, some of which they're now carrying out, some of which one or two they've done, and others that they're planning to do in the future. There's 9 recommendations. And then another report that came about a day later was that they're doing a pilot project where they're actually checking on the ethnicity during police stops. Because if you remember, we ourselves raised the whole thing about, the large number of people from ethnic minorities that seem to be stopped.
Yeah.
And so on. And if I remember rightly, I may have this wrong, I think we actually asked the kind of question that you would, which is, how can you tell? And I think the answer was quite unsatisfactory, and they went away and they were going to come back to us. And looking at this report that I've seen, it doesn't look they're not giving any kind of idea about how it might be done, except they're going to ask people that question. So, I just feel, well, how will that work? If they don't answer, what will you do? Just say, okay then? Or will you press it? Or how will you do it?
I think they have to record it as that they don't know. I'm happy to discuss it, but you need to decide what you want to drop. It has to be March, because I think our February meeting's only a couple of weeks away, and I don't think
I was thinking of March, actually, Chair. Yeah.
I mean,
Sorry, colleagues. I know that, you know, we've got a very tight agenda, but I just feel that it is important to try and keep on top of this, and you know, for the police, I think, to understand a bit more about how concerned we are about all of this, and that maybe they should have at least notified the chair of what they were doing.
I mean, we'd have to drop something. We've already wrote to Thames Water, asking them to do a brief update.
Yeah.
Could we not have a written update from Thames Water?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
you know, at this point, it's I'm not sure that there's that much to say.
No. It's just that we did say to them we'd had them back in 6.
Yeah.
If we asked them for a written update and then ask the police for an update on the work on what we discussed at our meeting, was it November or October? And the recent statements they've just put out on handcuffing.
Yeah, I think there is room for that in March.
Yeah.
So we dropped Thames Water.
Yeah, I mean, Thames Water is just the summary. There isn't much. It's not about. We won't have so much questions and all that. But I think this recent one that is talking about, I'll check my mail and send my comments to you.
We'll have a brief.
I will send the documents to you all in a minute. Yeah.
That's what I was going to ask. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And we'll have a brief update on resident engagement.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a nice.
Thank you.
Nice, everybody. See you tomorrow.
Take care.
Oh yeah, that's true. See you tomorrow.